That's why it takes us 4 hours to record a 20-minute
Right?
episode.
You actually only get 20 minutes of usable material.
usable
I
material.
understand. I've known you a while now. I'm unsurprised.
I also didn't get the costume memo from either of you. Look at you in your flannel shirts.
Yeah, I'm pretty
I'll
much
actually go and
from
get mine.
July till like May the 3rd. It's
Yeah.
flannel season. There's like
Flannel
2 weeks of
season.
summery dresses, but other than that, it's flannel season. And Simon
So
obviously
jealous.
Exactly the
is
same for me.
part of the same tribe.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. I'll take note.
Nice.
Nice. Do you want to go? Shall we go?
Cool. Hi, Vicky.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, very well, thanks. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good, good.
We've been invaded.
We have the American invasion of 2025. Get the year
Oh,
right.
well, the first American invasion
First
of
American.
2025. Let's leave it open to what may
Yeah.
come.
Oh, you might recognise Cara's voice from our trailer. Very kindly did a bit of voiceover for us. You were the
Good.
filthy seductress who did a few lines for us on that. Now, you being here, well, there's two pieces of news, really. One is I'm having a baby
Woohoo.
Woo.
with my wife,
Yes,
and
not
I'm
with us.
the dad. Yeah. So that's cool. And I suspect that's going to take up a bit of time. So whilst I'm busy learning how to keep a child alive, Cara's going to step in and do a few episodes in my absence. And so he's joining us today just to
Learn the ropes.
Yeah,
ropes, I
just
guess,
a
yeah.
gentle introduction we were thinking, rather than dropping you in the deep end. So it's so
Thank
lovely to have you
you.
here.
Thank you very
Um,
much. Long time listener, first time visitor.
Ah,
So I appreciate it.
exciting. Love it. I've got a story for you today. You ready?
Yes.
Cool. So this is about a lady called Victoria Woodhull. Got a little intro here. From fortune teller to Wall Street tycoon, presidential candidate to scandalous headline maker, Victoria defied every expectation of Victorian womanhood. Born into poverty, escaping an abusive marriage, she became a champion of free love, a financial powerhouse, and the first woman to run for the President of the United States. This is the unbelievable story of Victoria Woodhull.
I thought you were going to bring us something impressive this week, Vicky.
It says in there that this is an unbelievable story, and it is. That's how I felt like when I was researching it. I was like, there's no way Simon's going to believe this. Like, there's just no way that's going to happen at all. And then because we've got an actual American with us today as well, it's kind of all serendipitous, kind of come together. We've got some sources today. I've leaned on a couple of articles, womenshistory.org. There's a news site called nyhistory.org, a Times article which was really useful, and there was a blog post called Victoria for President, and then a couple of Wikipedia articles as well. Cara, have you heard of Victoria Woodhull?
No, but I am broadly ignorant, so don't let that be any
I just
indication.
wondered, because it's like the first female,
I know,
like you
you
can
would
see that
think.
being.
You would think that I should know all about this, but
No, I meant like the system. I meant like the education system. Maybe it was
well, no,
involved in that.
this is it's always a mystery to me whether my ignorance is my own or whether it is actually baked in to the educational system, and maybe both. Could be
Maybe
both.
it's a mix. Okay, well, hopefully this will be fun. So Victoria was born in Homer, Ohio on the 23rd of September, 1838. So we're right back in our comfort zone in Victorian times. She has parents called Reuben Bookman Cleflin and Roxana Hummel. Roxana went by Roxy. She was number 7 out of 10 children, which we're learning is quite normal, isn't it? Like to have lots of children. Her childhood it was so tricky and turbulent. It's really fascinating. Her parents were unmarried, which today, fine. Back then, big deal. Then probably the biggest turning point in her childhood was that her family was forced to leave their hometown under the suspicion that her father had purposely burned down the mill he owned for an insurance payout because it had bad rot. So they got that reputation as that family in the town.
Ostracised. Their name went
Ostracized,
around.
there you go. Yeah.
Also, did they not have shotgun weddings back then? Because, like, normally if you get pregnant, you just quick get married in a month. They made it through 7 kids.
I don't know if it was maybe a money thing because you had to pay to get
Mm.
married, and
Uh,
we are on like the poverty line here. So
yeah.
she was known to starve as a child. Her father was abusive. They lost siblings because their health was so bad. Victoria actually spent her early years, so after the whole burning down the mill situation, they on the run in a way. So actually they joined a traveling show and she and her sisters would tell fortunes. So they were working at such a young age and selling homemade medicines. Her dad was what was known as a snake oil salesman. Do you know anything about snake oil and
Uh,
sales?
Only from that Simpsons episode where Homer and his dad sell this male potency thing.
The Simpsons are very good at predicting, so
It's-
maybe they were right. So snake oil is such a fascinating. I'd encourage people to go and research it because it's wild. It's completely insane. So basically, they just take any old oil they could find, stick loads of spices and herbs, sometimes just some compounds, some sand or something in there, and then they would sell it at an overpriced rate. And then it's basically fraud because then you'd
Mm.
say, this is this magic medicine and it will do all these magical things. And her dad did that for a living, right? Like that's how he earned money.
Wow.
Like an early precursor to Goop.
Precursor to what?
Goop.
Oh, Goop, which one's that?
Gwyneth Paltrow. Oh, we
That's
should
it.
cut that
Yeah,
out. I
yeah,
don't want to get sued.
yeah. She'll be
Yes,
on
that's all
so
perfectly
quick.
legitimate.
She's got so many
Those
lawyers.
crystal eggs are absolutely life-changing.
So this went on snake oil until 1906, when under the Pure Food and Drug Act, that was when that came in, and then you could end up facing federal prosecution for fraud. So actually, we're in early 1800s, 1840s, around that time. There was nothing stopping them doing this and selling this oil. There's a really interesting episode on snake oil by the podcast called Maintenance Phase, and its impacts on the health industry and how it's manifested in today. If you really, I thought it was really interesting. So
Mhm.
definitely go and research that. Because of all this, poor Victoria, she didn't get much education. I think over time she had about 3 years worth of schooling at a local church school. So she wasn't necessarily educated either. And to be honest, she had a lot on. She had lots
Mm.
of fortunes to do, lots of traveling because she's part of a traveling show. And then again, not unusually for the time, she was married at 15 to a guy called Canning Woodhull. And ironically, he was a doctor. So there's her dad selling medicine.
He
I
must have
want
been
you.
considerably older than her, unless people were also becoming doctors at age 15 in those times.
Great point. So
You
he's a
would
little bit
imagine,
older.
at
Yeah. So
least.
it turns out Canning was a lot like her father because he sold patent medicines rather than snake oil with stuff in, and he presented himself as a doctor. But there were no exams needed. You didn't need a license to be a doctor back then. It was very
Wow.
easy to pretend to be an expert, right? Unfortunately, he was very much like her father. Her married life wasn't really any better than what she'd grown up with. He was an alcoholic and he was physically abusive. He cheated on Victoria many times and he failed to support the family financially as well. Because, being a lying doctor, I don't think is that
It's not
fruitful.
sort of lucrative in the long term, is it?
There's only so many times you can be like, I found this thing. Trust me, it works. So they did have two children. They had a son called Byron and a daughter called Zulu. Byron actually had an intellectual disability, which Victoria put down to Canning and his drinking, and that he wasn't fit physically to be a dad. Then Victoria does something very interesting. She divorces him in 1864. So divorced women back then were seen very much as outcasts of society. It wasn't a good reputation,
Yeah.
but that might not have bothered her because she had that thing with the fraud and the burning down of the mill. So she's
Hmm.
already been seen as an outcast by society throughout her whole childhood.
I suppose she's experienced the flip side of that of having unmarried parents as well. So growing up, she
Mhm.
would have seen that reaction that she gets.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And she was also part of a movement called Free Love. So she became very actively involved in the free love movement. Do you know what the free love movement is?
Not in the 1800s.
Great point. So this is before hippies, basically.
Yeah.
This is the generation before. And free love was founded by a utopian socialist and philosopher, John Humphrey Noyes. He came up with the term free love in 1848. So very similar kind of time frame. He's also known for starting a swingers community in upstate New York.
That's
That
what
was him.
that's where I was born, upstate New York, not the swingers community. Wow. Who
So
knew?
yeah, they have a thriving swingers community. Who knew?
That seems like a risky time because, like the 60s, like free love, hippie, that sort
Yeah,
of sexual revolution in the
a
60s
hundred years
coincided with
later.
birth control.
Right, so this movement of free love
Oh,
was a reaction to the Industrial Revolution and that emphasis on capitalism. So they were like, this is greed orientated, this is not the right values, we want these kind of values. Therefore, one of the values of free love is you should only stay with someone in a relationship if you were happy, not for mutual gain. So she didn't want to stay in her relationship with Canning because she wasn't happy. So that's
Hmm.
what she did. It was born out of a reaction to early
Mm.
stage capitalism.
wow.
And as three people in late stage capitalism, maybe we should learn something from that. I don't know. So Victoria then divorces. She actually finds herself a husband who's actually quite cool. He's part of these free love movements. This is after the Civil War. His name is Colonel James Harvey Blood. What a name. And there's no official record of them being married, but they've both said that they got married in 1866, but we can't really find anything.
There's something slightly
Um,
contradictory about being in a free love movement and getting married.
well, maybe they did air quotes marriage. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Yeah, or like a commitment. What would we
yeah,
call it?
yeah.
Like humanitarian marriage, where it's not necessarily in a church or anything. It's, two humans saying, I like you a lot. So they, as a couple, move to New York City. They take Victoria's sister, Tennessee, with them in 1868. Tennessee has a nickname called Tenny. So if you hear Tenny, that's who it is.
That's cute.
Great nickname. I know, so
Yeah.
cute. It's like Agatha and Taggy. I love that. I think that's adorable. So it's very
Oh,
similar.
taggy. That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Victoria then started a salon. Now, salons also aren't what they are today. This was basically a space, like a club, where you gathered and chatted about different topics and kind of influences on you at the time. So it's not a hair salon, it's just like a social kind of club.
Yeah.
It's very much in my head when I read that, I was like, oh, it's like Twitter. It's like Twitter,
It's way
what that
nicer than
used to
Twitter.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in the good old days of Twitter. Yeah. Doing this salon work, she met many influential New Yorkers and was very well known as a conversationalist. She's like very good at working a room and it's a talent, right? And I bet that's from traveling with
Must
they're
be.
not a
And just
circus, as they, but what would you call that? Like a
like a
traveling,
traveling sideshow sort of setup.
yeah, kind of thing. I bet that's where she got those skills from.
Yeah. I mean, being a fortune teller, you've got to be able to talk a lot without much to go on.
That's so true.
I know.
Yeah,
And
you've
different
got to
people
pull on
each
those
time.
strings.
Yeah.
So Victoria and Tennessee continued doing spiritual advisory work, is what they're calling
Hmm.
it now. So spiritual advisors. One of their clients was actually a recently widowed millionaire because now she's got this massive network because she's doing the salon. This millionaire was called Cornelius Vanderbilt, which is also a great,
Incredible.
sounds like a villain to me. That sounds like
Yeah.
a
Aren't the Vanderbilts
US
quite a big
drama.
family in
They
US history?
were, if it's the same Vanderbilts, how many can there be? They had massive estates. I know of them from Rhode Island because one of the great mansions was it's a Vanderbilt property. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
He's definitely cemented in American history, like
I
Mm.
think I've heard
family.
them on some sort of podcast about railways, as sort of most big families at that time started in railways.
Of
And,
course, yeah, because it's Industrial Revolution, right?
Yeah.
So they allegedly helped Cornelius contact his dead wife. So he really valued them. He was like, oh my gosh, you've helped me do this. They also advised him on financial decisions, and he also taught them a lot of financial education as well. So they just basically connected and they learned how to invest from Cornelius. It really helped that Cornelius had a crush on Tenny. He really fancied her. His little pet name for her was Little Sparrow, and he actually ended up proposing to Tenny as well.
Oh.
Tenny called him old boy, which is not as nice, and politely declined his proposal, she said.
Ah,
Little
I was on
sparrow.
tenterhooks.
Yes, sweaty pigeon.
Absolutely.
Predatory hawk.
I know, because
Oh,
the age gap would be strong. So,
Maybe that's
bit
a
of
thing.
niche Vanderbilt trivia for you.
mhm.
Um, at the end of the 19th century, Blenheim Palace was saved by ruins from funds gained from the Vanderbilts.
Oh my gosh, I love Blenheim Palace. It's amazing. Wow. There you go.
Mhm.
So they've got Cornelius on board. Victoria believed that financial success was the key to a woman's independence, even more so than the right to vote. So what did she do? Um, it then goes into a really tight timeline. So the next 4 or 5 years, a lot happened. So Victoria took all that knowledge she'd got from Cornelius and she actually took action. In 1869, there was a panic that crashed the gold market. What Victoria chose to do was just rock up to Wall Street and set up a carriage outside the gold exchange, then offered advice that she'd taken from Cornelius, and then bought deflated stocks. During the panic crash of the gold market, she made $700,000
Wow.
from her
Wow.
little carriage outside and buying stocks. Cornelius was like, I like this. I like doing that a lot. I like what you're thinking. And he helped them set up a stock brokerage firm called Woodhull, Claffin and Company, which then opened the next year in 1870. This stock
It's
brokerage firm
amazing.
was, I know, and even better, I think, was that it was exclusively for female clients. So they really niched down on this market. Only females were allowed to go to this brokerage.
We've had other stories from around this time where women weren't
Hmm.
even allowed to start companies. It had
Hmm.
to be done in their husband's name, and all their
Hmm.
assets belonged to their husband. Did they have to get sneaky to set this up?
Not necessarily. What I think their clientele were, to be honest, widows, like widowhood,
Hmm.
because we
Okay.
know that's a really good way to protect your money. And also, women did get pocket money as well.
Hmm.
And I think maybe husbands assumed they were going to spend it on dresses, and actually, this was a different way of protecting it.
Mm.
So they targeted women who wanted to protect their money and invest it, and no one would take them seriously.
Hmm.
So they'd maybe approached brokerages in the past and were turned
I
away.
see.
There's even a sign in the window that stated, "Gentlemen will state their business and then retire at once."
My
Um,
mum's got the same sign on her front door.
Quite right. Absolutely. Basically, they made a splash in the headlines of having women on Wall Street, women in the stock exchange, women buying gold, and that novelty kind of wore off a little bit, and people just thought it was maybe a fad. But actually, they continue to make good money, this company. They continue to make really good decisions, and they actually ended up earning other brokers' respect in the industry. They were actually known as the Queen of Finance on Wall Street, which is very cool. So that was Tenny and Victoria's nickname.
That's wicked. And so
It's
often in
really
these
cool.
companies, you have like they start off, women can't possibly do this, or either not allowed to, or how on earth can a woman ride a horse? That sort of thing. And then it comes along and they kick ass and prove that in fact it can happen. And this like action seems to be what changes
Yeah,
rather than merely protesting or advocating it. They're getting out there, doing it, proving these people wrong.
I know. I feel like we should be doing that, but that's internal pressure. But
Ah,
like,
next
it's
week.
really, it's really interesting that they weren't just a hot flash in the pan. They didn't want to be
Hmm.
that. They wanted to be continued success, which is really cool.
So they
And
had a
you'll,
decent business. It wasn't just propaganda and snake
yeah.
oil underneath it. They
Well,
had
I'd
some.
remember the really tight timeline we're talking about here. So the next bit is 3 months after they started their business, they used their profit, so they're profitable 3 months in, and then they actually launched a newspaper called Woodhull and Claflin Weekly. This newspaper was, again, them taking action, just what you were saying, them wanting to be part of something bigger. And they published articles including arguing for equal treatment of women, giving women the right to vote, reforming labour practices, legalising prostitution. So, this is again those free love values coming through.
Mhm.
They wanted a reform on dress codes. They spoke about sex education, which was completely taboo at the time. They spoke about their spiritual backgrounds, vegetarianism. They were even like, maybe you
Throw
should
that
eat
in.
less meat. Yeah. And all this was underpinned by those values of free love that we spoke about earlier, about kind of pushing back a little bit on capitalism and actually love is love. We're all, everyone's
Hmm.
welcome kind of
This
thing.
is, I can't necessarily comment on the free love side of it, but that's such a contemporary set of topics
I
for a
know.
magazine. And I mean, you think even these days, like what's the Daily Mail supplement, female or something,
I
you get
know.
a female specific supplement in the paper that's purely about here's a good place to buy a dress that a celebrity wore, and here's a meal you can cook for your husband.
Yeah.
But to have a magazine that's actually going out and tackling these issues,
They're not easy issues either.
no.
Like legalizing prostitution and sex education
And
is
vegetarianism, that's like the three
bloody
big hitters
hell.
to tick off, isn't it?
Jesus.
Yeah.
Um, but they again they did this off their own back, which was fascinating. They had a writer who wrote a lot for each issue called Stephen Pearl Andrews, who was the promoter of another social system called pantrarchy, Pantarchy, which was a theory rejecting conventional marriage and advocating for free love, combined with the communal management of children and poverty. So it takes a village, that kind of vibe.
It's proper hippie stuff.
Really strong. They did get criticism. You don't want to go and use that brokerage because they believe in this. So their reputation, not tarnished by this, but that they linked the two up. And they did have their critics because it was so radical, I guess, compared to what had come before.
Really out there, sort of conservative Victorian times
Mm.
in a
Yes, you've
deeply
got
religious
this is
country, you
Victorian.
know?
Think of like Victorian dresses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. We know that Woodhull obviously supported these views. She actually was also invited to write a series of articles for the New York Herald off the back of her stockbroker fame, exploring these topics. So she's got two publications now that she's contributing to, which is insane. And that was the thing that kind of drop fed her to be like, actually, there's enough here to make a paper. So she was really involved in it. It wasn't just a, here's an idea, you go and do it. She was very much on the ground with it all. So this kind of gives us an insight into who Victoria is. I think it's quite clear that these values of where she came from. And now she's got success and she's got money on top of all of that. What happens to people with really strong values and then suddenly come into a lot of money?
Politics
Damn right, politics comes a knocking.
or by a
So,
social network.
or by a social network. Yeah, and then rename it.
Mm.
So you're right. So Wall Street and White House obviously have a really close link. Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury. And she had infiltrated both of these arenas using her salon and her influence and her networking. These are quite historically male areas, but Woodhull wanted to change that. So she was known to give fiery speeches. A lot of those covered women's suffrage. Notably, in 1871, she did a speech in the US House of Representatives. That speech was so well received that it got her accepted by suffragist leaders, who then were like, oh, actually, this woman's something. There's something with her. It's not just the flash in the pan of the brokerage. It's not just the stuff she writes in the papers. She's actually got solid views here.
It seems like all these things that happened in her childhood inadvertently was sort of training her up for this moment. Because I guess
Damn
from
right.
her, like her parents and the way they were ostracized, that must have shaped her social views in some way, and being the child of unmarried parents, and then having this sort of ability for rhetoric and conversation from her traveling sideshow skills, and then the
Yeah.
money as well, and the network from the salon. You need all
Yeah.
of these, really. There are lots of rich people who would be terrible politicians. And there are lots of people who can speak well who don't have the money to get into it. But somehow it's just all, this has all come together for her, isn't it?
Yeah, politics leans towards people who can hold an audience, who
Hmm.
are happy to perform like a stunt or two. And because she is a performer, remember, like you were saying,
Yeah.
she knows how to keep people on their toes. And because of these speeches, she was now doing that in a political setting. There was lots of crowds around her when she went to the ballot boxes, because one of her arguments was, if you read carefully, if you actually looked at the 14th and 15th Amendment, you'd find that it guarantees the protection of the right of all citizens. That was the wording, right? So she was like, well, I'm a citizen. Well, I should be able to vote. And then she called this raucous at the ballot boxes,
Hmm.
claiming that the 14th Amendment actually, and to be honest, her logic was sound.
Mm.
Like, yeah, she wasn't wrong. She caused a stunt off the back of that. So there was like
Yeah.
paper articles about this raucous that she caused at the ballot boxes, and people are being like, look, there's a woman. Oh my God. So that was her view on the right to vote.
Yeah. I mean, fact doesn't count for much if you can't get any attention on it. So,
Yeah, for sure. So you can see by this point, like she's making friends with the suffragettes. She's got a little bit of fame behind her. She's got this money behind her. This all leads to, in 1971, Victoria announcing that she's going to run for president for the new United States, even though women didn't technically have the right to vote. To be fair, there wasn't anything written down that it was illegal for women to run for office. Like they hadn't even
mhm.
considered that. Like they hadn't even thought it would be an option.
Such
So
such
again,
an unthinkable idea.
yeah, so on
We
another
don't even need to.
technicality,
Yeah.
yeah, on another technicality, she's like, I got you guys. She became the official nominee of the newly formed Equal Rights Party. That party was like a bit of a spin-off of the suffragette movement.
Hmm.
And they even selected a black man as the running partner, so as vice president. His name was Frederick Douglass. He wasn't active in the campaign, but he is on the ballot papers. You can see them,
Hmm.
picture of each.
This
The
is an
equals,
incredible sort of middle finger to society of the time, isn't it?
can
In
you
absolutely
imagine?
everything, which this is absolute outrage.
It's every, but again, it's crazy, isn't it? Because having just been through a presidential election, those things were still areas of contention, weren't they?
Oh
Like
yeah.
having a woman run, having a black woman run, all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Don't think about it too much. So, the Equals Rights Party hoped to use the nominations to reunite the suffragettes with the African American civil rights activists, because there's this argument that suffragettes were for white women. You know what I mean? They were alienating other minorities. Victoria in 1871 publicly spoke out about against the government of because it was just men. So she was making all these claims. And what do people do when a woman rises to some sort of position of power and influence?
I try and shoot her down in every way possible and make out that she's
100.
a, I don't know, dirty slut or something. It's,
100%. They tear
oh,
her down.
yeah.
Enter the press. So,
Oh, perfect.
um, she was attacked for her belief in free love, which was epitomized by a famous political cartoonist, Thomas Nast, who depicted Victoria as Satan's wife, basically advocating free love.
Perfect.
Did I put this picture in your notes? If not, I'll show
Uh,
you it.
oh, I see.
It's like a cartoon.
Yeah, with demon wings.
Yep, so there's her in really quite scary. She's got like horns and wings and a cloak with a little sign that says free love. And in the background, there's actually a woman you can see there who would, rather than be with Victoria in this free love movement, would actually rather carry her drunk husband on her back with two babies and make her own way rather than being associated really with
Yeah.
Victoria and her
I mean, this is
campaign.
the classic thing of just sidestepping the issue, isn't it? We're not going to, it doesn't matter what your arguments are or the validity of them. We're not going to address
Mhm.
any of those. We're not going to
Yeah.
address these causes or concerns that you have. We're just going to undermine you completely.
100%. And she was attacked on all fronts for being a woman.
Yeah.
She wasn't even 35 years old. So there was that problem. There was the free love problem. There was a coming from your background problem. She was attacked all over the place. But she was a fighter. So, that's not the end of the story. But in the background, her troubles were starting to mount. So her ex-husband reappeared and took up residency with her because she was doing well. And this again provided more material for the press to attack her on. Basically, the press had lots of ammo. Religious groups also didn't like Victoria because of her free love philosophy. Preachers were known to call her unwieldy. Is that it? Unwieldy.
Unwieldy?
Yes, there we go. Unwieldy. Um,
I've never described anyone as unwieldy before.
I would not feel comfortable using that word in conversation. I'm not gonna lie. I'd be like, nope.
If you associate unwieldy with a wheelbarrow.
Well, maybe that's what they wanted her to be. I don't know. One of her most vocal critics was Reverend Harvey Ward Beecher.
Mhm.
Now, Victoria, remember she ran a newspaper. She is not unknown to go digging for a story. She just happened to find out that Reverend Henry, was cheating on his wife with a married woman in the parish. So not only is he slamming Victoria for free love,
He's slamming another woman.
he's slamming her for free love and like having sex out of marriage. You can't possibly do that. But
Yeah.
then is having sex out of marriage with a woman in his parish.
That's why he was so angry about it. He's just trying to deflect the attention away.
I would describe that as highly unwieldy.
The hypocrisy was out of this world. It was so Victoria was like, well, you're not coping with the confines of marriage very well, Henry. Like, you've clearly got a problem. She wrote an expose on Henry, and then so she covered that in her newspaper because she owns a newspaper, and that actually led the Reverend to go on trial for adultery. So he actually got his comeuppance. I know, I can't believe it. On the flip side, it also led actually to Victoria's demise.
It just makes me wonder whether I mean, she had the showmanship, she could get people's attention, she had the ability to speak, she had the money to back her. She doesn't. It reminds me a bit of Jingxi. Jingxi, who did have that political nous to know who to put pressure on and how to use the information that she has, how to use these views to her own advantage and to be a winner. Victoria seems maybe a bit overly sort of scattershot and maybe too busy and too enthusiastic and not considerate enough and not strategic enough.
I would agree. I think that's really important. But I do think when you're in a childhood where you're always moving, always on to the next thing, always just you're not thinking 10 steps ahead. You're not thinking, what am I going to have for dinner next week? You're just
thinking
reacting.
next meal.
Yeah. And I think that is a theme throughout her life. It's just lurching, just got to fix that problem, got to fix that problem, rather than long-term thinking. So yeah, I'd agree.
It's a shame because she's obviously a woman of like extraordinary ability.
And go-getter vibes. Like the action that she is taking is like, it's unstoppable, isn't it? It's like,
it's
I'm going to do this,
extraordinary.
I'm going to do this. Yeah, absolutely. So Victoria, Tenny, and her husband were all arrested on charges of obscenity because the story that she had published was so detailed. It was classed in legal terms as offensive. It was illegal to send immoral content through the mail. Who knew? Who knew that was a law? You can't send this through the post. The courts eventually did acquit all of them on a technicality, but this was after being imprisoned for 6 months. Those 6 months, that's her presidential campaign, basically. Yeah. So she was like out of action for the whole thing. She actually spent election day in her jail cell, which is not the place you want to be. So her move for presidency was officially over. She and her husband paid $500,000 in bail and they eventually went bankrupt. They actually divorced. It's a lot of stress in 1876. This was the same year she stopped publicising Woodhull and Clapham's Weekly, so the paper.
1876, so she's 38 at this point.
I know, it's a lot in a short amount of time, isn't it? It's crazy. The case had also negatively affected Victoria's reputation with the suffragette movement. So, like I said before, they were they just about accepted her, but then it was like, oh no, you've done this now, so they flipped back.
I'd imagine she sounds like she was just always on the outside, always like
Yeah, I think she
fighting to
was
get
just
in, fighting for
too.
acceptance.
Yeah, I think she was just too radical for the
Yeah.
time. I think she went in, like you said, all guns blazing, like it
Hmm.
was all or nothing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Victoria did continue to give lectures to the public and focus on women's rights within marriage. Um, Victoria and Tennessee, it's really cute that she stuck with her sister. They eventually retired in England in 1877. Victoria managed to build a career as a lecturer. She got married again, which is crazy, to a guy called John Biddulph Martin. They married in 1883. She continued weirdly to use the name Woodhull, which
Mhm.
was her name from her first marriage of her rubbish husband, but she added Martin on the end, so it became Victoria Woodhull Martin. As she got older, her views grew less polarizing. She was very active in the suffragette movement in Great Britain.
Mhm.
She continued to write, so she must have enjoyed these things. So she continued to write for a newspaper that focused on equals rights. It was called The Humanitarian. And she had been known to, I was talking to Cara about this earlier. She had been known to focus on eugenics, which makes me feel a little bit awkward, but let's not undo all the action she's
It's
taken. Um, she also did lots of different publications as well, and her and her sister actually became known in social circles in Britain for their work for philanthropy. So she was always for society. I think in whatever she was doing, it was always to try and move society on, which I really enjoyed. She died on the 9th of June 1927. She was 88. But I
wow.
do think she's such a crazy example of so many things. So, for example, you can have multiple careers. She went from fortune teller to stockbroker to journalist to a lecturer, quite a lot of careers in a short amount of time. You don't have to have a formal education to be able to thrive, and I think that's even more true in today's society. And she stuck to her values pretty much consistently all the way through. And I think, yeah, good for you, girl.
She got a lot of heat for them.
She
She
did.
took a
Yeah.
She
lot of
did.
flack for that, but sort of stuck to it throughout. I
Yep.
mean, the story is completely absurd. It's the whole thing is insane. It's just
It's so
turbulence throughout, isn't
lurchy.
it?
Yeah, turbulence throughout. I love that. Yeah.
Blinking heck. I should have so much
Um,
energy for it all.
It's the snake oil,
It's just
clearly.
that's what it is. Yeah, it turns
Isn't
out
it
it did
all
work.
really a story of the power of
all that
snake oil?
time, and it did work. It did work. Yeah, so that
Mm,
is the story of Victoria Woodhull and her many, many, many lives. Yeah,
it's
quite a cool one,
incredible.
right?
Yeah, she feels like a right woman, wrong time
Yeah,
sort of thing.
I
I'd
agree.
love to know how that energy would work out today.
Well,
And
it's interesting listening to it because it is resonant of women like Kamala Harris who have put themselves out there and tried to move the ball down the pitch only to have those ad hominem attacks. And you must come to a point where you either have to give up what you believe in, decide to respond to those attacks, or just try to ignore them and plow ahead. It's incredibly complex even now, and how much of her story is still relevant today is
yeah,
It's
un
scary, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's dismaying.
and you don't necessarily see the impact of that sort of linearly in exactly the areas that she is, but just the fact that she's gone out with this courage and taken this flack maybe gives other people the confidence to do things in totally different or more personal aspects of their life.
Mm.
And the money. I mean, that practical thing of setting up a stock brokerage for women and financially empowering widows to make their own
Oh, so
choices, that's
cool. I love it.
absolutely incredible. Really
Yeah.
practical.
So, yeah. Well, thank you for listening, guys.
Thanks all.
Thanks for
Yeah,
being our
Thank you.
audience, Cara. Thanks.
It's been great.
pleasure. Welcome to
This is like a VIP version of listening to the podcast.
It's
I'm very
true.
excited.
it.
We still expect your download, I'm not gonna
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. No problem.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. Thanks for joining us, Cara. This has
Thanks for
been She
having me.
Changed History. Remember to like, rate, subscribe, check out our socials.
Mm. We are doing a shout out if you've got any suggested subjects for us, or if you've just got a really cool story to tell about any woman at any time. They don't have to have changed history, quote unquote, just someone who's pretty kick-ass. Please share, and then we'll do a listener episode at some point. That'll be really cool.
I learned over Christmas a really badass fact about my grandmother, and it's that showmanship thing. She was a lovely, very humble woman. And my mom was saying that when my brother was about 16, he got an electronic keyboard for Christmas and he was fooling around with it. And grandma said something like, "Oh, maybe I could try." And my mom said to her, "I didn't know that you could play." And she said, "Oh, yeah, I can play a bit." And mom said, "Well, what will you play?" And my grandmother said, "What do you want to hear?" And absolutely sat there and flawlessly two-hand proper played anything they cared to name.
That's
And bearing in
incredible.
mind, my mom's like in her 50s at this point. My grandmother never ever let on that she had that ability. And I thought, you've been like, that's been in your locker the
Wow.
whole time.
Jeez.
What an absolute smasher. I loved it. So,
What
50
a
years with that in your
lady.
back pocket.
not a showwoman, like, not a showy person, but she had that going on. I'm like, that is amazing.
Also, playing by ear is such a skill anyway. Can
I
you
mean,
imagine?
yeah,
Incredible.
absolutely incredible. Maybe not quite
Nice
what you were
one.
looking for, but it's
Oh
my
my gosh, we'll
grandma. I
take
gotta tell
anything.
you.
We'll
I
love
love
it.
it.
We'll love
Yeah.
it. Thank you. Nice one. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Cool. See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.